How are homes built here in Boise, Idaho? What are the common siding materials that are used? How are foundations made? Framing techniques, insulation ratings? All of those questions we're going to be talking about in this video. I sat down with my good friend Jeremy Putman, who is an architect in downtown Boise, and he goes into all those details. Really fascinating stuff. Let's just jump right into it. What is the difference between, let's say, stucco siding, wood siding, cement hardy backer board, or vinyl siding? You know, different houses have those different siding. Is one better than the other?
It depends on what you're going for. A lot of things depend on the aesthetic that you're trying to achieve in the building. As far as like cost, vinyl siding would probably be on the low end of the spectrum, and then hardy siding would be in the middle. Then stucco, and then if you got into real wood, that would probably be on that higher end. Stucco is a very common material, especially in California, and we do have some here, although the predominant siding here in the Idaho area is a hardy siding, which is a cement board siding, or vinyl. Vinyl goes on easy. It's fairly cheap to install, but if it gets damaged, then you have to replace a whole panel. Hardy siding or cement board siding is a little bit more expensive because you have to lay it lap by lap going up, but it's durable. And
is it more durable than vinyl?
It is, yeah. So there is virtually no maintenance with vinyl, but cement board siding, you'll have a little bit of maintenance. You'll have to paint it maybe every 10 to 12 years, something like that. Stucco is then also a very durable material, but it is more labor intensive, and so that's why it's going to cost more.
And we were talking earlier, like in California, I feel like a lot of the homes are stucco siding, whereas here you hardly see any at all. I mean, there are some, but not very commonly. Why is that? Do you know?
Sure, a lot of it has to do with the aesthetic that California likes to show in their homes, just because of the Spanish influence, but it's also there for fire. A lot of California is in a high fire zone, and so that stucco does lend to a fire rating from the exterior.
So kind of thinking about fire, actually, what are some fire codes maybe that you would commonly see on homes here? Like, for instance, isn't it in a garage, there's like some sort of fire rating, different, like there should be different drywall and doors. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. There is a requirement to have the garage separated by a fire barrier from the living space. And that's due to what is stored in there. There's usually, chemicals and gas that could have a higher tendency to catch fire, and so they want to maintain that rating by having a 5/8 inch thick drywall on the inside of the garage, and then the door between the living space and the garage needs to be rated about 20 minutes.
And the door has to shut automatically, right?
Correct.
It's got to have the hinges that
the self-closing hinge. Yeah.
Sometimes, a lot of times actually, I've seen doors, in different houses that are coming from the garage into the house that don't have that hinge.
Correct.
It's an easy fix, honestly. If you're selling your house that doesn't have it,
correct.
$30, you probably pick up at Lowe's those little hinges.
Yep.
But that is a fire code, right?
Correct.
And that 5/8 inch drywall, that's thicker than the normal drywall.
Correct. Usually on the interior of a house, they use 1/2 inch drywall.
So it's got 1/8 of an inch
more gypsum board, yeah.
And that puts a fire barrier of
1 hour.
1 hour. Let's talk about foundations now, and maybe give me an example. You were talking earlier of maybe an example of some things that can go wrong when building foundations, and things to look at, because I do see a lot of like minor cracks in foundations here, and that's pretty common from what I understand from all the inspectors tell me this. How are foundations made, and what are maybe some major issues to look out for if you do see a crack in a foundation?
Sure. Generally, the foundations are made with concrete and rebar, and the foundation is made up of a footing, which is the wide, low part, and a stem wall, which is comes up generally about 2 feet, that you would then start to frame your floor on. Now, concrete cracks. Doesn't matter if it's in your foundation or in a slab, concrete is going to crack. So that's not a big problem. Where the problem does reside is if there is something that's larger than 1/4 inch. You do want to have somebody take a look at that.
So larger than 1/4 inch is kind of the standard that you're like, okay, you should check it out.
Yeah, or something larger than a hairline crack.
Okay.
And I have an example of a friend who called up and said, "Hey, do you know a structural engineer? Because we've got this crack in the foundation." And she sent me a picture, and it was a 1/2 inch wide.
1/2 inch?
A 1/2 inch wide.
Yeah, so that's pretty big.
Yeah, it is pretty big. And so when the structural engineer went out there, he discovered that there was no rebar in the stem wall. Now, part of the building process, so even in new homes, I guess is an example of why it's good to get an inspection. In new home construction, the foundation, the footing is formed up and the rebar is laid, and an inspector comes to take a look at that to make sure that it's been done right. And there's rebar sticking out of that footing.
Mm-hmm.
Later, you're supposed to come back in, install the stem wall rebar on that rebar that's sticking out, and then form up to pour the concrete for the stem wall. However, the inspector doesn't come out for that portion.
Never.
They don't typically. And so what had happened in this instance is most likely rebar was left out of that stem wall.
So what do you do in that situation? I mean,
I don't know, honestly.
because you can't fix it. You can't just insert.
You can't
rebar.
insert it. There are ways of maybe adding more concrete to the inside that does have rebar, but that gets expensive because now you're working in a crawl space.
Right.
And it's difficult to do.
Wow. Tell us a bit about framing. 2x4s, 2x6s. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, modern homes or anything from the 80s and to currently is framed with a 2x6 stud on the exterior wall.
Mainly on the outside, right?
Mainly on the outside.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll find a 2x6 wall interior if there's a lot of plumbing in it.
Okay.
But generally, interior walls are framed with 2x4. And the largest reason they went to 2x6 is because of the higher energy code requirements. And so you need a greater level of insulation. R20 is the standard for the thermal value of the exterior wall.
Okay.
And so in order to achieve that, you need a deeper stud cavity.
And so it's only for, it's not, it doesn't have anything to do with structure?
No,
Like it's
generally
not more structurally sound or something like that?
No, for a 2-story home, you can achieve like the structural support you need with 2x4 framing. But 2x6 obviously gives you a higher structural value, but it also gets that greater depth for the energy code compliance, which is then helpful in the life of the house. With the thicker insulation, your energy requirements are reduced over time.
Now, how does this work when you're dealing with homes that are older? So, you know, I've looked at homes that are built in 1920.
Mm-hmm.
Those homes definitely, you know, are not built with the same codes that we have today. So is all that just kind of grandfathered in?
Correct.
And you just deal with the problems as they arise?
You do, yeah. Building codes change over time. And so as long as the house was built according to the code, or the structure was built according to the code at the time, it is typically grandfathered in. As you change things, you do need to bring them up to current code. Okay. So for example, in that 1920s house, if there was some electrical work that needed to be done, well, typically you would actually just want to replace all the electrical in that house because it is older wire that doesn't have the protection of wiring today.
Like the grounds
and also the insulated value around the wire itself. And so in that, if you wanted to do anything, you would need to upgrade it to the current code.
If you do anything? I mean, if you rewire one room, you have to rewire the entire house? Is that how it works?
I would recommend it.
Uh-huh.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Yeah. So when we're talking about window panes, Idaho, a lot of them have double panes, sometimes triple pane windows. What do you have anything to say about that? I mean, just energy, is it just an energy thing?
It is an energy thing mainly, but it's also acoustic value.
Oh, okay.
So a single pane window, and sometimes you'll come across the house that still has the original windows, and they're generally 70s and older that have single pane, which is fine. It keeps the weather out, but
it's gonna be cold.
It's going to be colder for sure. And so if you find something like that, it would be a good idea to consider switching them out for at least double pane. One, to increase your energy value, but then also acoustics. Single pane window, you're going to hear a lot. You're going to hear the cars going by. You're going to hear the neighbors mowing their lawn. With the double pane window, that is greatly reduced.
So when you're talking about insulation in the attic, is like, how thick is it usually?
It's usually about 15 to 18 inches deep.
Okay.
And so you do want to make sure that there is attic insulation in there because, right, heat rises. And so in the wintertime, if you don't have that insulative layer in your attic, the heat's just going to be escaping out the house and your furnace is going to be running all the time.
And does the insulation work both ways? I mean, in the summer, is that going to protect you from the heat coming in?
It does, yeah.
It does. Does the insulation need to be over the garage? Because I've seen houses that have insulation over the garage and some of them that don't.
It doesn't have to be because it's not an occupied space.
Okay.
And that is typically the way it has been done in the past. My house doesn't have insulation over the garage. There is an insulative barrier between the living space there's a small portion of living space that is above our garage, and that's insulated.
Oh, okay. So it's not uncommon to see no insulation over the garage, but I mean, some people blow it in.
Yeah, it's a good idea because your garage it will gain and lose heat. And so especially if you're storing things out in your garage, you don't want your candles to melt that are in the box. It'd be a good idea to put some insulation in there. Yeah.
Or you don't want your paint cans to freeze.
Exactly.
That's what happened to mine a couple of years ago. They actually froze and all my paint was gone. So what about crawl spaces versus slabs? Pretty much most homes here, I mean almost all homes, are crawl spaces. I have seen some that are on slabs though. And why? I mean, what's the difference between a crawl space versus a slab?
Slab on grade is usually done in a situation where you're going for something specific. Maybe you want a stained concrete look for the floor, or you want a solid base for a tile scenario. I have not seen a lot of slab on grade houses in the general market. Usually
in Boise, you mean?
In the Boise area. Usually that's in a house that the owner wanted to do something specific.
Like something special. Like maybe you have like heated floors or something like that?
Correct, yeah. A radiant heat floor is something that is very common with the slab on grade.
Is it cheaper to build on a slab? Is that a cost thing? Is it cheaper to dig out a crawl space? What's the price difference on that?
Generally, it's cheaper to do slab on grade because what you're excavating is just the foundations and stem wall. And then the rest of that grade can be left. So there is more money that goes into excavating a crawl space because you're digging out more dirt and you have to
dispose of it.
Get rid of it, yeah. However, generally a crawl space is a very utilitarian area. And so a lot of your plumbing is all your plumbing is run there. And HVAC system ductwork is also run.
So if you're on a slab, where does all that go? I mean, where's all the plumbing? Is it through the walls?
No, plumbing would still be underground, and so they would cut those lines and stub them out before they, backfilled and poured the concrete floor. And
then you can never access it?
Correct.
Wow.
Which is, I mean, typically you don't have to do any maintenance on the piping itself. Yeah. And then in that slab on grade scenario, all the ductwork would be run above, kind of in the ceiling.
Thanks, Jeremy. That was great. If you like this kind of videos, tap the like button so that I know that you like this, and I'll try and put more of these videos together in the future.
That's a good question.
Okay, so never mind. We'll forget about that. Yeah. So you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it.